You're listening to audio from Redeemer Church. We're a gospel-centered missional family located in Midland, Texas. If you would like to get more information or give to this ministry, please visit redeemermidland.org.
This morning, we are going to be talking about memory, about remembering as a part of our life, a part of our walk, a part of what it looks like for us to follow after Christ. And memory, like we know, is a pretty powerful thing, and sometimes we can have these kind of visceral responses. I don't know if you have these memories sometimes, maybe whenever you lay down at night, and you have these memories of something that you said or something that you did in the past, and maybe it's years ago, and it's suddenly like you have this like visceral, like sort of physical response. Anybody? Is that just me? Like we call them the shame shivers, like whenever you think about something you said or did, and you just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Like one time I guessed wrong about whether or not a woman was pregnant, and yeah, I was 16, but still, like I think about that one and I'm like, oh gosh, right? Like you have this like deep, serious response, right? Or sometimes I'll remember a word of like that my kids used to say. Like my oldest, for the longest time, he loved oranges, but he would always say anjans, right? He would say anjans. And somebody will kind of mumble something or mispronounce something, and I'll have this sudden like time travel flashback remembering our oldest coming up in our first little house. And him just like sort of like first grappling with language and the world around us. Memory has this like sort of powerful way of transporting us to places that we have been, somehow transforming the place around us. And so what I want to talk about today is what it looks like for us to be intentional in the practice of memory as a part of walking through things that the Lord might put in our path. To do that, we're going to be walking through Psalm 77, which is a favorite and near and dear to my heart. So to start us off, I'm going to be in Psalm 77. If you're in one of these Bibles that they had up front, which I'm borrowing for the morning, it's on page 279, but we'll start in verse 1. Now, we're just going to read a little bit, talk a little bit, read a little bit, and we'll just make our way through the passage for today. Does that work for everybody? Everybody good? You with me? Psalm 77. To the choir master according to Jeduthun, a psalm of Asaph. I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. Selah. This psalm starts out with this guy, Asaph, who's in some sort of deep, wearying distress. The weight has been sitting on his shoulders long enough. Maybe you've been backpacking and you know the kind of weariness of bearing a load over a long journey. And you just feel it. It's not muscle soreness. It's not just sort of a weakness in your body. It's not just that you're out of breath. It steeps in your shoulders. You feel it like sort of deep down in the bones of your hips. And whatever it is that he's suffering through, we don't get a picture of what that is, but whatever it is he's suffering through has him weary. The language is human, it's raw, it's vulnerable. He says, I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me in the day of my trouble. I seek the Lord. He's doing the things, right, that you hope someone of the people of God would do. He's seeking out the Lord. But then hear how he describes what it looks like for him to seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. I cannot stop. Like, I cannot keep from reaching out to God because I feel so helpless, so in desperate need of someone to save me, of someone to help. I'm just holding, and you sort of get this picture of him like sort of waving his arms, like grasping, hoping maybe that the Lord will take hold of his hand and confirm to him that he's there, that he's not alone. He says, I reach out my hand without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. Whatever it is that he's dealing with, he has been praying. This is a day and night kind of thing. The language we get here is that this is not just one bad day. It is a season that he has been enduring and buckling under. And for whatever reason, he has cried out, he has prayed out, he has reached out, he's done everything he can think of, and God has been silent. Or at the very least, if God has responded and has helped him, Asaph is completely unaware of it. He cannot see it. So to him, God has been silent. Is it okay for us to say that in church? Like that sometimes you are buckling and you are pleading and you are doing all you know how to do to reach out and ask for the Lord, and sometimes you hear nothing but your own voice echoing off the ceiling? Look what he says next. There he broke, that was from Psalm 76. Verse 3. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. What he's saying here is, when I just think about God, I groan in exasperation, in exhaustion. He says here, when I meditate, when I try to pray and think on the things of the Lord, the truths of the Lord, my spirit, that is his ruach, it grows weary. That is, the very essence of his life feels as though it will fail. What he's saying, a person who wrote a song, a person of the people of God, what he's saying is, if I even think about God, I groan and my body wants to give up. This is in the Bible. This is how a prayer like that's been a part of the people of God's worship for thousands of years. They have sung this song. We have prayed this prayer as a people, and it is saying, when I think about God, I feel like my body will break apart. The essence of my life is shutting down just at the thought of praying. Like if you heard a friend, like in one of your small groups, I don't know what y'all call small groups here, gospel communities, missional communities, community groups, transformation squadrons, I don't know, every church has a different name for it, right? But community groups, like if you heard somebody in your community group saying, man, I know I've been in a hard time and people keep coming up and telling me to pray, but if I even think about God, I just want to give it all up. Like if one more person tells me the Lord works in mysterious ways, I'm just gonna walk out the door. I'm so done. Like if you heard that language, you'd be deeply worried, right? Like you'd be like pulling out passages, you'd be trying to like find ways of encouragement, you'd be coming around that person to say like, bro, we can't get to that point, we can't get there. And what I'm saying is like, what we could say, and maybe this church has the kind of community and the kind of culture where you would be able to hear someone say that and to come alongside them, and instead of quickly coming at them with some sort of cliche, maybe you could quickly come alongside them and say, bro, you are in good company. That's where Asaph was. You are not alone in there. Like the scriptures speak this language for you. If you're too weary to faint, bro, let Psalm 77 pray in your stead. They're in good company. Now, don't leave them there, right? Like, let's walk our way through the rest of the psalm, but you are in good company. Let's keep reading. Verse 4, you hold my eyelids open. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. He cannot sleep. He cannot speak. This is deep, deep struggle. Maybe you have been there. Maybe you are there. A lot of babies around this room. There's a lot of people in here who know what it's like to not sleep. Right? Maybe you understand this, you feel this. Verse 5, I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Now, what Asaph does here is, like, we're dealing with a mature believer here. And I want us to see, like, to pick up the signs here, to see what's, because this is a black belt move, what he just did here. Because if you've been in this kind of struggle, like where it's sitting and waiting on your chest and you can't draw a full breath, like if you've been in this kind of struggle, like there's no question about whether or not you can work your way out of this crisis. Like, you know, you are not equal to the task. When you've been in that kind of trauma and struggle and pain, what happens to the rest of the world? What happens to your past? What happens to your understanding of who you are and your gifts? It all gets shrunk down, right? In this deep, dark night of the soul, all you see is the darkness. It shrinks everything down. And so the black belt move here is he says, I have to remind myself, because the enemy is speaking to me that this pain, this suffering, this loneliness, this feeling of abandonment by God himself, I have to remind myself that this is not always what has been, that what is not always what has been. And so he says, I will meditate, I will think on the things of old. I will remind myself, he says, of a day when he would sing at night. He says, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. He's trying to remind himself, God has been faithful to him in the past. To intentionally put himself in the place of remembering, man, there were these days where, man, I woke up excited to see what the Lord would do. When I could not possibly count the many blessings of the Lord. When song easily sprang from my mouth, when I didn't stay up at night pleading and crying and reaching out my hand, instead I stayed up at night singing and praising and marveling at the goodness of God. There were those days in my past. So he's reminding himself, this pain, this trauma, whatever he's dealing with, this, what is not always what has been. That makes sense? And he's going to keep going with this. Again, we're dealing with someone who's mature, who's walked this road before, and who knows the path. He says, verse 6.5. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? You hear those questions? Again, this is in the Bible that he's asking these questions. These questions that, like, I don't know about you, but I think for a lot of people in a lot of churches would be hard to say out loud in front of church people. Let me read them again, and I want to read them from a couple of other translations, and I want to read them slow, and I want you to hear what these questions are. Will the Lord walk off and leave us forever? Will he never smile again? Is his love worn threadbare? Is his kindness gone for all time? His word done for time without end? Has his salvation promise burned out? Has God forgotten to show grace? Has he closed off in wrath his compassion? Now, I don't know. Like, I'm not in Asaph's mind whenever he writes this, but I can tell you why I think this is yet another, like, sort of move of maturity here. Is because when you're in these dark nights, and if you haven't, sister, brother, they're coming. But if you've had these dark nights, it's not just that you only sort of see that moment. It's also difficult for you to see much truth, right? It's really difficult for you to see anything outside that's not related to, that's not some sort of quick deception, some easy lie of the enemy that's trying to explain and turn and twist things for why you are in that situation that you're in. Like, it is easy, like there's this thing that happens, right? Like if you've been in this situation and you have been praying and pleading and doing what you feel like you are supposed to do to try to see the Lord deliver you from this moment, and it feels to you as though the Lord is silent, right? Like, it is easy for the enemy to just sort of like start stacking little things up on you until all of a sudden, like what you believe, what you functionally believe about God has been radically turned on you, right? Like, is the Lord going to deliver me from this thing? Well, I know that there's a lot of people that end up in really difficult situations. Like, maybe this is how I end. Why was I thinking that God was going to do something about this situation? How many people do I know who've been in bad situations and it just got worse? Why would I ever think that God would do something but allow things to just get worse? Why would I think that God is even capable of doing something about this? Why would I believe that God has the power, the capability, or the concern? Why would I think that he's concerned? Why would I think that he is loving, that he is able? Why would I think that he's there at all? Like, these things don't just narrow our vision of like our life and what God is up to. Like, there is this capacity that the enemy has in these moments of deep difficulty and struggle where these things can kind of be stacked on us. And without even being aware of it, there is this functional disbelief in the goodness of God and in the truths of the gospel that can start to be sort of stacked up in our heart, and it is crushing. And so I think what Asaph does here is yet another black belt move, because he doesn't just step back from it, run from it, try to distract himself from it, right? Like, he doesn't just say, all right, you know what? Those are two big questions. I don't know what's going to happen. I just gotta eject here, right? He looks it right in the face, and he asks the hardest questions, the big questions. He asks, is he done with me? Has the Lord done? Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he forever shut up his compassion and enclosed it within his anger? And the answer to all those questions is no, of course not. Of course he's still faithful. Of course he is still who he says he is. Of course he is still the God who has always been faithful to his people. But Asaph looks right at that sort of deep abyss and asks the hardest questions that he can. Let's keep reading. Then I said, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. With your arm, redeemed your people, the children of God, the children of Jacob and Joseph. Again, what he does here is to remind himself of some things that are true. He asks those hard questions, and then he declares to himself some truths about who God is. And he's going to do it again here in another section, in the final section of our psalm for today. But here he's doing it sort of with this big wide lens. Right here we get like sort of satellite view of who God is and what God does, right? He says, your way, O God, is holy. That's right, God's way is holy. So for me to doubt, for me to believe that there might be some wickedness in what God is up to, man, I can't believe that, because I believe that God is holy, right? That he says, what God is great like our God. That's right, that God is great. And so if he is great, then I need not fear other powers. What God is great like our God? There is no God who is great like our God. So I need not fear other powers. I need to be reminded of that when fear tries to tell me, no, you got to take things into your own hands. You got to find someone else or some other system or some other way of believing, or you got to be able to take this, steal this, get yours, because nobody else is going to look out for you, certainly not God, right? It drives out that fear of scarcity, that God couldn't possibly take care of you, because you remind yourself of the greatness of God. He says, you are the God who works wonders. This situation, compared to the things that I've seen you do, that I've known that you have done, the stories that I've grown up with, or the stories that you've grown me with, this situation is well within your capacity. You've made known your might among the peoples. You with your arm redeemed your people. Man, maybe your dark night is feeling taken hold of, enslaved, and captured by something that has its hooks in you. something that you are drawn to that you can't tell people about, something that has hold of your wallet and your time and your mind and your interests and your desires, and you can't talk to people about that thing. And the few people who do know, man, they don't want to tell anybody either because it feels like it'll tear everybody's world apart. Like maybe that's your thing. And what he's saying here is, Lord, you have brought your people out of slavery to world superpowers. You can bring me out of my current captivity. So you see what he does here, like the move here, this first move here is, what's the character of God? What's the big picture sort of activity of God? Who is he and what does he do? And then he gets real specific. So we went satellite view, and now we're going to zoom into a specific place, and we're going to see this sort of beautiful poetic language about describing a certain story that I would imagine many of you are familiar with. It says, when the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way, hear this, your way was through the sea. Your path through the great waters. Yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Like he zooms way in. We know what story he's talking about here? It's the Red Sea, right? It's the delivering of God's people, right? So the 10 plagues have broken the back of Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and Pharaoh decided to go ahead and let them go. And then after they're gone, his heart again turns dark against them. He changes his mind. He sends the armies, the chariots after them. And so they're chasing them down. And at the point where they can start to see and hear, like, hey, here comes the army. They're at our backs. That's at the same time that they're trying to figure out how to get across the Red Sea. And you remember some of this story about how they're just like sort of rebuking Moses. They're screaming at him. They're insulting him. Why would you bring us all this way just to have us drowned in the sea? Right? And the situation is understandable. And I think it gives us a glimpse as to why Asaph's mind, his heart, his meditation goes to this place in particular. We were talking about satellite view. Who is God and what kind of things is God up to? And then he zooms down into this specific spot. So imagine yourself in the position of these Israelites. They stand with the waters at their front. And you got to remember, for people during this time, deep waters was a much scarier thing. Like their bass boats didn't have like a fish finder and a depth meter, right? Like it was this deep abyss, and sometimes there be monsters, right? Like the abyss is this deep, dark, scary place. So at their front is the abyss, and at their back is the greatest military might the world has ever put together. This is not rock in a hard place. It's drown to death or be speared or enslaved. Those are the options that they see before them. And you and I know the story of the Red Sea. So whenever he makes this mention, we think, oh yeah, God was faithful to bring them through the sea. But they didn't know that story because they were living that story. Nobody had told them that sometimes God takes you through the waters. So for them, they stand at the shores undelivered as of that moment. They haven't made their way through that particular abyss. And that's where Asaph is. He stands at the shore. He's not through the waters yet. The waters continue to churn. They are deep in front of him. They have not been parted. The chariot's still at his back. He can hear the wheels and the hooves a-stomping. That's where he finds himself. And so he draws himself back to this place, to this sort of like walking with, this camaraderie with God's people in a situation where they wait upon the Lord to deliver, but they have not seen it yet, and they don't know how it could be possible. He specifically notes, your way was through the sea. Who would have thought that up? Nobody puts that on the whiteboard like when they're brainstorming about how to get out of this mess, nobody puts it on the whiteboard like, why don't we just walk across the sea, right? Nobody saw this coming. And it specifically says, Your way was through the sea, your paths through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. And I'm not in his mind or in his heart. But my mind, my heart immediately thought, oh, here's a guy whose prayers haven't been answered, and he's reminding himself that sometimes the Lord's footprints are unseen. Sometimes he is leading us in ways that we cannot even see. Like, do you see what he does here? It's again this mature, deeply developed black belt move. Because, like I said, maybe you've been through these situations before. Maybe you're in them now. And if you haven't, congratulations on your youth, because they're coming, right? And whenever we are in these kind of impossible, the weight seems to be dragging us down, breaking our shoulders, grinding our vertebrae together kind of seasons. Oftentimes, it's a totally human and understandable response to either detach or deconstruct. Like whenever you're in these moments of crisis and it doesn't seem like the Lord is swooping in and you feel like you've prayed and you've done your part and you've tried to figure out what it is that you're supposed to do, there is an understandable and very human response to just say, this situation, this problem is bigger than me. I can't solve it. So if something's going to happen, whether it's going to be good or bad, whether this thing ends me or somehow somebody saves me, I got to completely back out of this thing. So I'm going to detach. I mean, we can do that a ton of ways, right? Like you can just like sort of say like, all right, I got through another day at this job that is just miserable and that I'm pretty sure they're tired of me. I'm going to come home and family's not going that great and spouse is not really pumped about being with me and living with me anymore or whatever your situation is. And you can just, instead of like engaging with it at all, we sit and we doom scroll, right? Like we can just distract ourselves because we completely want to detach. Maybe we're just going to watch something. Maybe that's on Netflix. Maybe it's somewhere else online that we're going to watch something to escape, to push ourselves away from the reality of the moment, to chase some fleeting sensation. Man, another good way to detach is just to work yourself like crazy. Man, I can't control this whirling vortex, this chaos of a thing that seems like it's coming after me. But you know what I can do? I can work like crazy, make more money, achieve more, build more, earn more, and I'll just wrap my identity around this thing because this thing, these chariots, too scary for me to turn around and chase. That abyss, actually engaging those relationship problems, I'm not even gonna set foot in that water. So I'm just gonna wrap myself up in this identity over here in work, in school, in family, and whatever else. We can do it with drinking, we can do it with drugs, we can do it with relationships, we can do it with all sorts of things. It's a very human and natural response to just detach. For some of us, we don't detach, we deconstruct. We ask hard questions, but we ask them with a different tone. We're just flailing, we're lobbing bombs, we're hurling rocks at stained glass, trying to say, man, none of this stuff was ever real. If God didn't move in for me in the way that I expected, if God didn't act in the way that I would have designed and declared, well, then he never was there before in the first place. And all these people who believe all these things, man, what idiots to lean on and depend on something that obviously was never there before. And so you start tearing apart at all these building blocks that have sort of held you up, these pillars that have been in your life, and you just try to pull everything apart. And you keep breaking down and breaking down and breaking down, and suddenly there is no stone left on top of another, and you were just standing in the midst of your own rubble saying, well, then what is there? Man, let me encourage you, if you are the deconstruction kind of type, man, ask the hardest questions you can think of. But you don't have to hurl rocks at the stained glass while you do it. Can I promise you, I don't know any of you, Jordan's a pretty smart fella, right? He's not outsmarting Augustine, right? He's not outsmarting like Calvin, Bonhoeffer, Kierkegaard, right? You are not coming up with questions that the Christian faith has not wrestled with. You do not have challenges that the scriptures cannot possibly meet. You do not have questions, deep concerns that the God of the universe might tremble and avoid if you were to ask them of him. Take your hardest questions, but take them to the Lord. Ask them. Walk to brothers who have some security, who have some maturity, who are going to be able to walk with you, who are going to be able to say, I don't know, but let's find out together. Ask those deep, hard questions. So, natural human responses that we detach or that we deconstruct. Here's what I want to call us into. This is where I'll finish up. Here's what I want us to encourage us towards. Is to think about what Asaph is doing here is he's saying, I'm going to wait on the Lord to part the sea. I'm in this impossible situation, and I'm going to wait on the Lord. But it's not passive. Can I encourage us to see that waiting upon the Lord in this kind of sense is not passive? Instead, can I encourage you that in these impossible situations, that you wait on the Lord with a call to radical remembrance. Radical remembrance. Like that in these moments, that we anchor ourselves in the same ways that we see Asaph doing, and in some ways not available to Asaph. Like we can remind ourselves as he did, man, this, what is right now, is not always what has been. And we can remind ourselves of the goodness of God to us in our lives, in the past. We can remind ourselves of how we have seen him be good to us, good to our families, good to our people, good to our communities. We can remind ourselves of these things. We can remind ourselves of the stories of Scripture. And thank God, we have more stories, we have more testimony of God's faithfulness available to us than Asaph did during his time. Not only can you say God was faithful to bring his people through the sea, you can be reminded that Christ was faithful, that we've been brought through our own Red Sea moment. That's what's symbolized in baptism that y'all are going to celebrate here in a few weeks. We've been brought through our own Red Sea moment, through our own waters, our own deep abyss, because Christ lived the life that we couldn't live, died the death that we should have died, so that through his resurrection we might have the eternal life we never ever deserved. And I'm not just talking about at the moment of death and beyond. I'm talking about this eternal, beautiful, rich, resurrected, given new life kind of a life that happens right at that moment that the Spirit does something in us. So we remember God's promises, his goodness, the gospel truths in those deep, dark nights. But here's the beautiful thing about having a timeless God is that you don't just have to remember the past. You can remember the present and you can remember the future. Remembering in the present that Christ promised that he was sending his Spirit, that we might have his Spirit with us as a sign and seal of our salvation, a guarantee of our inheritance until we receive it. One of the ways we talk about spiritual formation, growing in spiritual maturity, is growing in the awareness of and response to the presence and truths of God. Growing in awareness of and response to the presence in every moment of life and the truths of God. And the last one, I know I need to wrap up here. Last thing, you and I, because we serve a timeless and faithful God who has made promises to us. So many of those promises we've already seen his faithfulness in, and we get to hold on to, anchor ourselves in the fact that we still have good reason to hope, because there is good reason to hope in the future. The mystery of the gospel. Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ will come again. Radical remembrance calls us to remember who God is and what he does, what we have seen in our past personally as a church, as a community, and as a people of God. It reminds us to remember the goodness, the gifts, the truths of God in our presence, and it reminds us somehow, mysteriously, to be able to remember God's promises for the future. Hope, brothers and sisters, has not put us to shame. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we're grateful today, Lord, for you, for these people. Lord, I'm grateful for this church. Lord, I pray that you would continue to bless the work of Redeemer Midland. Lord, that you would give wisdom and guidance and humility and boldness to her elders and leaders. Lord, that you would build in this place a community of such beautiful and rich and sacrificial one anothering, that your words on the night of the Last Supper would be would be easily seen in Midland, Texas, that people would know you, that know that this church follows after you because of the way this church loves one another. And Lord, I pray that as this church, or as the individuals here, or pockets of people here face these deep, dark nights, Lord, that you would give us this sweet gift of radical remembrance. We'd be reminded of who you are and what you do, and how because of your faithfulness, your goodness, and your promises to us, because of what Christ has certainly accomplished, because of the working of your Spirit, the seal that it is on our hearts, on our souls, we have good reason to hope, and hope has not put us to shame. Lord, we love you. We trust you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this message from Redeemer Church. If you'd like to get connected or learn more about Redeemer, visit redeemermidland.org.